Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of In the Ven Zone, where we help small businesses learn how to ask for more, and then we provide you some of the tools and techniques to negotiate it. Today, I am so excited to have Nick Yousif with us today. He has the most fascinating background. So he is an attorney in Massachusetts, but he's also a comedian and an actor. I don't know about you, but the idea of having a comedian and an actor as an attorney makes working with attorneys a lot more fun to me. He graduated from Roger Williams University. He's actually has his own law practice in Boston that he's been operating for almost a decade now. He works in the areas of bankruptcy, divorce, real estate, and personal injury. But he's also, like I said, he's this comedian, and he's performed at the Wilbur Theater, which, if you're not from the Boston area, is an incredible landmark location and venue to perform at. He's also performed at the Comedy Connection, Nick's Comedy Stop, the Comedy Studio. So he's got just an incredible background in comedy, and he's also an actor, and he co-starred in the Pulitzer Prize nominated The Elaborate Entrance of Chad Deity in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is fluent in Arabic. He's of Lebanese ancestry. He's conversational in French. This guy is just a Renaissance guy. And I'm super excited to have Nick join us because he's got so many amazing lessons that he's going to be able to share with you on things that he's learned over the life of being an attorney. But one of the things that I didn't read, he's actually launching a chocolate business. So for all of you chocolate lovers, just wait. So he's got just this wealth of experience to share with us in terms of what negotiation has done for him, what some of the lessons are that he's learned, and some of the stories that he's gathered along the way in his journey that he's going to be able to share. So Nick, thank you for joining us here on In the Ven Zone. So excited to have you.
So glad to be here, and thank you for having me. That was, it feels like my mom sent you that bio.
Well, awesome. So tell us a little bit more about you. Tell us how you ended up. I mean, it's an unusual path to be, to go to law school and then to become a comedian and then to start an entrepreneurial business in chocolate, of all things. How did you kind of move on to that path?
So, I got some really great advice when I was younger, and it was, if you have an interest in something, always say yes to it. And I don't think anybody's ever really born an expert in anything. So, I mean, why should somebody do something that you have a passion for? Why shouldn't it be you? And I feel like, in comedy, you can tell a funny joke, but the joke has to be sui generis to you. It has to be you. So if there's a passion that you have, that's really all you need for it to give you some ownership of it. And if you've got ownership in that space and you enjoy it and others around you enjoy it, why not try to profit off of it too? So, and making a business or profiting off of it is just one metric of success. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can get in being personally enriched by the experience, having another common denominator that makes you, that gives you something to have something in common with somebody else, right? Mm. So for me, it was just, if there's one thing about being an attorney, you're always trying to think outside the box, and you're always trying to figure out ways to not be confined in certain contracts in certain situations. So for me, it was like, well, why do chocolate companies essentially poison us with all this sugar? And how do they take the cocoa bean and take something that was essentially healthy and turn it into something that's not healthy? So how do we get the good out of chocolate, but not have it come with all the baggage of processed sugar and, just unnecessary things that aren't that organic that, may end up hurting us in the long term? So that's really how I got to that point. And my sister had a sugar sensitivity. So I said, okay, she likes Nutella, she likes chocolate. Can we try to make something that's a little healthier? I talked to a couple of people that I knew in the business. I went to a couple of fancy food shows. I started actually making it myself and Googling different recipes. And then finally consulting with a few food chemists. And 2 years later, wow, 100 iterations of my recipe later, I came up with something that was shelf life stable, that could withstand, some time on a shelf, and also give you some health benefits as opposed to just being a sugary, unhealthy product.
That's awesome. I know so many women in particular who are going to be just delighted to hear that. Their chocolate.
Hopefully.
So where are you at in the production or in the distribution of it? Where are you at in the business process?
Yeah, so it's hard because in the same way that you do comedy, you're always trying to perfect a joke, but you need to add new material.
Mm,
I have the recipe. I've applied for the patent, so it's going to be patent pending,
mm,
soon to be recognized by the United States Trade and Patent Office. So right now I'm taking a look into distribution and trying to get a better sense for how to, because the way you have to make it is you have to get the packaging done. You have to be able to store the material, and then you need a platform with which to sell it.
mm,
So if you kind of don't have all these things all together, you're going to end up not being able to fulfill a lot of orders and order
mm,
requests, and then retailers will drop you. And if you actually just put it in the hands of the retailer to help you with these different things, they're going to dictate the cost of the product. So you
mm,
won't be able to profit on the margins, and they'll just be able to move product. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. How much do I determine in terms of how much do I hold in bulk that I can store that's still going to be shelf life stable? And also, can I get it to a point where I can actually negotiate with the
mm,
retailer so that Trader Joe's or Market Basket or Whole Foods doesn't come in and try to undercut my prices by $2 and telling me that's
right.
the only way they're going to have me on their shelf. So there's a whole lot of that. I've also spoken to some food brokers, and food
Yeah.
brokers are great. They can leverage their relationships with major retailers, but then
Hmm.
they take 4 to 6% off of every unit they sell. So,
Wow.
right. So these are all the economic factors that I have to consider that have nothing to do with the things that I like to do, which is
Hmm.
improving taste, improving the quality, making a protein rich, sweet, but not containing a lot of sugar
Hmm.
product. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm still technically in development, although we do have, again, a formula that we did apply a patent for.
Right.
And just now I'm just trying to figure out how do I build an organic platform online, try to
Hmm.
get enough units sold, and then pitch my product later to major
Right.
retailers.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the distribution for a second, because because obviously I am not a food expert. So that's an interesting kind of conundrum to be in. So do you want to go to a large retailer like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, or is that kind of the goal is to get there? Or how close and how much control do you want to have over the distribution once the formulas kind of patented and you're ready to go?
It's one of those. It's like a catch-22. You want to get yourself out there, but at what cost? And at what
Hmm.
cost do you want to concede control of your product and distribution to let a larger company or a larger distributor sort of call the shots? And
Hmm.
the problem is, how do you create value out of nothing? I mean, isn't that kind of it's like that's the art we're trying to create.
Right.
So yes, it's easier to go to Whole Foods and say, I've got 10 years of sales records that I can show you, and you should be so lucky to have this meeting with me. Well, I'm not quite there. So I have
Right.
to create the fire and smoke, so to speak, in the meantime, or at least show them that at least in my area, I can show them trends of loyalty. I can show them
Hmm.
local either gyms or local healthy markets continuing to show their repeat requests to reorder. So there are small little metrics that you can show to kind of give you the big dog bite, even if you're a small dog. So
Right. Well, something that I actually talk a lot about when I'm speaking is for small businesses, sometimes what has happened, and I've seen it many times over my career, is a small business will try to do business with a Goliath, right? And I do a lot of David and Goliath negotiation, is what I call them. And what will sometimes happen is that Goliath organization just kind of swallows up, the smaller organization with process requirements, billing requirements, uh, distribution requirements. In fact, previously on In the Ven Zone, I interviewed Scott O'Neill, who's the CEO of Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment. And they own the NBA team, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the National Hockey League's New Jersey Devils. And they actually started looking at their supplier base and realized that the same suppliers were winning business all the time. And the reason was because smaller companies, and they were really looking at it in terms of minority-owned businesses, and who were not winning their business. And the reason was because a small company cannot adhere to the distribution requirements, the pricing requirements, because our costs are automatically higher. So they looked for different ways to negotiate with their minority-owned businesses in order to be able to do that. And we talk a lot about how you have to be really careful as a small organization doing business with a monster organization, because they will eat into your profits. And at the end of the day, a lot of small companies say, well, I'm making revenue, but that's not the right question. The question is, are you making profit? What are you keeping out of what revenue you're generating? Because if you're not keeping enough profit to sustain yourself and to grow, then no amount of revenue, it makes a difference. And
Right.
so it is a very big challenge, and something that small companies often don't think enough about, because they get so excited about, oh my gosh, my product's going to be in Trader Joe's, and my product's going to be in Whole Foods. But what does that mean? What is the long-term implication? And I love how you're talking about that, because in negotiation, a lot of companies don't think about what's that longer-term implication? What's that plan B, plan C, plan D down the road? And that is going to impact how I negotiate this deal right now. So I love that. I love that. So when it comes to kind of thinking about that and going to one of the big guys versus keeping something kind of closer to the vest, doing it more boutique, kind of maybe doing influencer kind of stuff, or kind of, how are you evaluating that? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because when we're negotiating in business, how these strategic decisions flow into how we develop our negotiated relationships. These strategic decisions, because at the end of the day, and I don't know, with Nick being an attorney, and Nick, you're the first attorney I've had on the show. So I say two things about contracts. One is that contracts are documents of hope. They're based on the hope of a better future together. So if we do business together, we're both going to have a better outcome than we would have potentially without each other. So contract is just that document that outlines the conversation we had about what the future relationship is going to look like. And then the second thing, which I just forgot in my production studio, we'll have to do something different so that they cut this part out, because I just forgot what I was going to say. So my production studio will just. So anyway, I don't remember what the second thing is. So that's the first of the two things, and I'll come back to the second thing. So kind of, what's your reaction to that? Kind of, how do you think about that concept within the confines of the business that you're building today?
So, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously, the $1 million question. You know, to me, I try not to even think about it from the purpose of the product. I just try to think of what's my goal. And I think my goal is to ultimately control as much of the process as I can, and to ultimately create a platform. I mean, okay, so I'm creating a healthy chocolate spread. Okay, let's just say I become the greatest chocolate spreader on the planet. What's my next step? So I think the next step is to ultimately create a space of influence and a platform for really great, healthy products. So if I can keep my product with me, so I would say that for me, it's really just about keeping control of the product, because it's not just about creating a chocolate spread. What if I create other flavors? What if I create other food groups or food items that really fall in line with what I'm trying to do? Like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola doesn't just make Coke. They are into snacks, they're into chips, they're into all kinds of different things. So, and I think you have to diversify like that. So I can't make a decision today that later is going to affect my ability to create a larger platform. And that's where I start. So if I'm just going to say, oh, thanks for this $5 million buyout, wonderful, I'm great. Well, a part of me says, well, if somebody's willing to do that, that means it's going to create that much more impact on increasing their platform. So now I know I've got a potential platform starter. Why do I want to sell out for that number when I might be able to exponentially grow the value of my product and my platform? So I'm looking at it like my chocolate is really part of the bait. Now, if a larger company came to me and said, hey, we're going to introduce you and let you be part of our general platform, now we're talking. Because to me, it's not just about the dollar, like, okay, this is the value of this one product. I'm looking at it in terms of how can I create a horizontal move to make multiple vertical moves later on. So that's how I see it. It's not just about who gives me the opportunity to find customers. I mean, yes, that's part of it. But if they're going to limit my ability, so for example, if they make me sign an exclusive with them, I mean, what do I get out of that? Okay, I made a little bit more money, but who's to say that I couldn't have done that on my own? What part of that are they giving me that I can't? I mean, why can't I go get an influencer? Why can't I go get a celebrity and say, hey, listen, Jennifer Lopez, I'm going to give you 10% of everything we make together. Just sponsor it. And as opposed to a company that may just come in and say, well, we're going to control what we buy this for, and you have to give us exclusivity, or we're going to just buy the product from you and the rights for a certain amount of dollars. If it doesn't let me get to my sphere of influence in creating an overall greater platform, I just feel like I missed the forest for the trees.
So I love what you just said there. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is the importance of having clarity in your objectives and your goals when you're negotiating. And so you just very eloquently articulated what that clarity is. And that is so critical, because that having that clarity drives everything you do. And when you're negotiating, you can sit and say, you want to build a bigger platform. You don't just want to build a single product and sell the product to the highest bidder and then move on to something next. You have a vision of building a platform that that brings healthy chocolate in multiple ways to the market and creates kind of a community, is what I'm hearing you say, around that, and kind of elevating the importance of that, and having a broader impact around people, so people are eating healthy chocolate, not the stuff that we have on the market necessarily today, and healthy in a different way, because you're motivated by your sister and what her experience has been, and wanting to make that improvement for her and people like her. And so to our listeners, that making sure that you understand that clarity for you and what that looks like for you, knowing what your limitations are, knowing what your walkaways are. You, Nick, don't want to give up control entirely. You don't want a big company coming in to tell you to take over that one product at the expense of the other things that you might be able to create. And so for the listeners, having that kind of understanding of what it is that you want helps you really start to develop what your trade-offs are when you do engage in a negotiation. Yesterday, I was on the phone with a gentleman he's getting ready to launch a new product called Hi-Yo, and it is a beverage. And his motivation is creating an alternative to alcohol that's non-alcoholic. And for people who want to stop drinking or reduce their drinking. And his motivation is also very personal, and he has some very specific things that he's trying to do with that drink. I actually would love to introduce the two of you. I think you guys have some interesting things to talk about. So when you think about, one of the things that you kind of didn't talk about that I'm actually curious about is kind of what is your exit strategy? So a lot of small companies, they think about, they fall so in love with what they're doing, and because they're like bearing a child, and it's all consuming, and it's emotionally consuming, it's physically consuming, it's financially consuming. And then they don't think about what the end game is and what their kind of exit strategy is. And because your exit strategy also drives kind of how you negotiate. Kind of how are you thinking about an exit strategy as you think about the future of the business?
I mean, it's hard because I have so many other business ventures or things that I already do in my regular workspace, which I think is good and bad. It's
Mm-hmm.
good in that it doesn't put as much pressure on me to make snap decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and I can really focus on it and look at some things more of a hobby or more things and say, hey, what do I want to get out of this? So,
Right.
I mean, do I have a wife and child that are counting on me to sell out quick to get the first buck I can out of the business? No, I would say it's probably the opposite of that. My exit strategy is more in line with, does it allow me to stop doing other things and really focus on this? And where, so I'd have to look at first understanding what my time commitment would be. So
Mm.
can I now jump in full time on this, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to run a law practice, do real estate, or do whatever other projects I'm doing. So does this exit strategy involve me now being able to focus most of my time on this? Or is my exit strategy going to be focused more on just the economic, hey, I'm not going to have enough time to grow this business the way that I want to. There's a, Frito-Lay wants to come in and just say,
Mm-hmm.
look, we can give you more. We'll keep you for the short term. We'll give you some money to buy in, and we'll give you, royalties in
Mm-hmm.
perpetuity, to an extent where you'll always have an involvement in it, but you'll never have to worry about making long-term decisions for the
Right.
business. So, I mean, I think we kind of get back to the original thing, which is, what are you trying to get out of this? And then it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to, well, do I want to create a platform, or do I want to just do I want to do really well with just a single product? So I think I'm leaning towards trying to create a platform, way bigger risk, probably far more unrealistic. But hey, I had no business creating this chocolate product, and now I'm slowly starting to turn the heads of distributors who I spoke to them about this 2 years ago, and now they're trying it. Like, what the heck? How did you do it? The ingredients you told us you were going to use, chemists told us we couldn't use it. And I said, yeah, I know. So we kind of shifted it a little bit, and through trial and error, we were able to put the secret formula together, which I can't disclose for obvious reasons, but
Obvious. I
but
wouldn't even want you
I'm
to.
going to have to just send you a sample, and you're just going to have to take
That
my
would
word
be
for
awesome. I would
it.
love I would love that. I think
Yeah.
that you know, that actually, and I'm trying to remember her name. And as soon as so there, I'm good. There's a woman who created a makeup brand that she was told she couldn't sell, that nobody'd do it. And I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on her name, but I'll add it in the show notes for those of you who are going, oh God, Christine, you should know this woman's name. But she actually turned this brand that she built in her living room, nearly went bankrupt developing. She sold it to L'Oreal, and it was the largest deal in the history of L'Oreal.
Wow.
And she became the first woman CEO of a division of L'Oreal as a result. And she did I can't remember how many years, but she would be somebody for you to look to, because her whole thing was, she has rosacea, and her whole thing was creating a brand. And she went on QVC or Home Shopping Network, and sold it. And the first time she tried to pitch to them, they told her no. And it's a great story, and it really kind of highlights how you can build a community like you're talking about. Obviously a different industry in the beauty industry, but what you're doing has an impact on the beauty industry. So, right, because we are what we eat, right? So she would be somebody for you to kind of just check out, to see her story of how she did it, because she's done what you want to do, to a certain extent. So let's take a little bit of a switch for a second. Let's talk a little bit about comedy.
Okay.
So one of the things that we talk a lot about at Venn Negotiation is how we ask for things matters. And one of the things in all my speaking, because I speak all the time, that people are terrified of negotiating. I mean, absolutely. I had a guy who interviewed me for a podcast, and he's like, Christine, he's like, how can you talk about negotiation? It's so combative. And his whole body, he shut his whole body off. He closed it. He was protecting himself. And, I talk about how, and I said it a little bit earlier, negotiation is just a conversation. It's a conversation about a relationship, right? And my husband and I have been married for 27 years and together for almost 30 now. And I always say that the deal that we negotiated at the beginning of our relationship is not entirely the same deal we have today. But how we ask for things matters. How has comedy influenced how you ask for things when you're in a negotiation?
I think comedy helps me the most when I do divorce cases because I think the idea of comedy is it's really it's a crossover is what it is, to use a basketball analogy. Make them think you're going this way and then you come this way.
Yep.
And the comedy is in the aha, like, oh my, I didn't see that coming. So I think sometimes when I start a conversation, when I try to figure out the ultimate settlement or the one crucial piece to finalizing a divorce deal, I always start off with your spouse has just finally decided to take you back and just keep the marriage going, and we're ready to do this. What do you say? And they look at me like, are you effing kidding me? And so now they're so caught off guard by that. They did not, because I come in and I try to, I put my acting skills on. Look, so here's the deal. They're not going to divorce you, and you're going to have to just love them forever, for eternity. And it doesn't matter if you're happy or not. You just have to deal with it. Can you do it? All right, that's it. We don't have a choice. And they just and if I just pretend that I'm so serious about it, then they start to get nervous because they're like, this guy's never joked with me yet, and they don't know that I do comedy. And then finally, when I tell them, "Nah, I'm just playing with you," they burst out laughing and they let their guard down just a little bit. And then I say, "Look,
Yes.
so what's the price? What's the price of your freedom? What's the price of being unencumbered? What's the price of not having to deal with the anxiety of being stuck in a relationship as your life passes you by?
Mm-hmm.
You still want to argue over that stinking $5,000? Because
Yep.
you can do it, and I'll just keep making more money, and I hope you do. But I also have to explain to you the economics of the case. So now I'm kind of layering my argument about, hey, it's not just about winning, it's about how much you're paying for that win.
Right.
And we need to get you in a different perspective and a different mindset. So if I get you to think a little bit differently, and you're not so obsessive and being so compulsive about certain things, it's easier to see the case from 30,000 feet. In the same way that comedians are so appreciated for being sometimes brilliant, not me, but others, because they can take such a simple, silly thing, make you laugh about it, and really make you step back and go, wow, George Carlin was great at that. How, yeah, or, Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy talking about race relations. Like, oh my God, yeah, these are really good points. I didn't think about that. So I think, how do we creatively get people to open their mind? That's it. That's what we're trying to do. It's not that, and sometimes when you come in from the comedy angle, they maybe don't take it so seriously, but because they don't take it seriously, they actually start thinking in a different way. Because, oh, I got the lawyer and I got the suit and I got the judge, and wait till the judge hears about my what of a spouse. Cool, no one cares. Now, let's get back to what really does matter, your freedom.
I love that. I think that, and when I'm negotiating, I do a lot of kind of in kind of negotiation parlance or lingo, pattern interrupt, right? It's like, and that's a huge pattern interrupt.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time too. It's like, because really one of the big keys of being able to negotiate is to move somebody, especially on something emotional, right? So obviously divorce, hugely emotional, but it's also like when somebody has their own business and they've invested their entire life into it and life savings into it, there's an emotional connection. And Chris Voss in his book, Never Split the Difference, talks about tactical empathy. And one of the things that I love about his book and what he talks about, because having gone to Harvard for my MBA and being taught by the guys who wrote, Getting to Yes, and they're part of the Harvard program on negotiation and all that stuff, they're very process oriented, but they never were, when I was in school, they never talked about emotion, the emotional aspect of negotiating. And inherently, based on Chris's book, negotiation is inherently emotional. You cannot take emotion out of negotiation because we are emotional creatures. And so what you described, using kind of how you use comedy and the talent to interrupt somebody's pattern of thinking, to move them into a different thought process, is hugely valuable, because we have to do that especially when we're in a conflict situation and we're having to resolve something that is intensely emotional for people. Tell me a little bit more about how you've been able to do that, both in comedy and even in some of your law situations, or how you anticipate that playing out in the chocolate in the chocolate business.
Oh, I just think that it's people come in with preconceived notions all the time, and it's funny. I think most people make decisions both based on emotion. I would say the majority of people do. I mean, how can you not? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're not robots. So there's always going to be some emotional element to it. But the emotion is just the trick on your negotiation, if you think about it, or your ability to understand what you're trying to get out of it. I mean, so many times clients have just been so irrational. The funny thing is that any attorney will tell you, practicing law is great. The problem is the client. So I know how the judge is going to rule. I know what opposing counsel is going to do. We've probably talked off the record. And at the end of the day, it's a job. Like, nobody wants to suffer. We want to just get this done and be reasonable, which leaves us, who is ultimately the most unreasonable party? Your client. That's what they teach you in law school. So you just think, oh, I've done a great job negotiating this. I got a great deal. And you come back and the client's just like, no. Well, what do you mean no? How? That doesn't make any sense. So I have to understand the psychology of my client first. And using comedy allows me to take a broad brush and just take wide strokes. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have any of the cars, or you didn't have any of the retirement? I mean, you could still get by, right? But we could get a lot of support in the meantime, because that car's a depreciating asset anyway. Wouldn't you rather get the future income? So if they think that I'm kind of just being joking with them, it allows me to save face with them, so they don't feel like I'm betraying them in a way, but I can paint with a broader stroke so that I can start to realize, okay, if I take this emotional aspect out of it and get them to kind of smile or smirk, I can say, okay, now I can kind of push them back and forth a little bit. Because if I just sit there and say, well, you should really take this. Well, you should really take this. Well, now, they're not going to hear the message. They're just going to think that I'm quickly getting them off the phone, quickly getting them off that. So if they're going to stick me on the phone, then let me get ridiculous with this, get a little humorous, and then they'll be the ones to rein me back in. Or if they don't know what they want, they'll just say, well, look, I don't know if aliens are going to come down and steal the car. So why don't we just focus on the real estate, just commit to the child support and the retirement and be done with it? Because I can't, I can't keep doing this. Okay, good. Now I've been able to exercise them properly without telling them I'm exercising them. In the same way that a judge will frustrate parties by making both sides spend an obscene amount of money, because at some point in time, they just get fatigued.
Right. Yeah.
But comedy allows you not to just fatigue them, but allows you to exercise them, still give them positive energy, and reinforce the really important things, like getting out of a dysfunctional marriage, getting out of a bad contract, getting out of a bad lease agreement, whatever it is. So I think that's really, really important. As far as how I'm going to use comedy to sell chocolate, I mean, if somebody dies eating my product, hey, all the good news is I hadn't killed anybody before, all right? So I think I use comedy more for me so that I don't freak out about it, because, I think at some point in time, I have to have a good sense of humor about this, because it's really overwhelming to go into situations knowing you don't have the background, knowing I don't have the leverage I need to create the things that I want, but to be okay with the process, and to be okay with having people initially tell me early on, stick to law, stick to jokes, stick to whatever.
Right.
Yeah, but you're the same people that told me I was stupid for doing comedy. Aren't you the same people that told me I was stupid for leaving my job and opening my practice? Aren't you? So at some point in time, you start to see the pattern, and you say to yourself, oh yeah, the more somebody tells me no, that means I'm doing something great. So I'm going to just keep pushing, because if everybody tells me, wow, you're so smart, you're so handsome, and you've got all the right answers, and now I know something's wrong, right? Like now I know, oh crap, like something bad's going to happen. So, and just in the same way that I kind of went through that humor process with you, I have to keep reinforcing that with me so that I stay positive and that I'm doing things for the right reason. Or if I'm not going to do something, it's for the right reason, not because I'm scared or because I think I'm not ready. Well, okay, well, how do we get ready? And how many times are we going to keep saying we're not ready? What haven't we done to get us to that point? Right. So I think the humor has to be really for me, because I have to have a good sense of humor about it. Otherwise, I'm going to live on the edge of a nervous breakdown trying to manage growing a chocolate business, manage a law practice, manage the real estate, and feeling like I don't have any control over any of it. Because at some point in time, there's going to be a little bit of luck and I need to catch a break. And I also need to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to not blow that opportunity if I get it.
Right. And have a personal life on top of it. Right. Well, I think one of the things that I love to talk about is that, and the reason why the comedy in terms of how you describe it for being for you is that whenever we're in a negotiation, the hardest part of any negotiation is the negotiation that happens right between our ears. And, you know, what we convince ourselves of is what happens. And if you don't keep a sense of humor about it, you don't find ways of being optimistic about the future, then you just get stuck in the spiral that ends up yielding you very little on the back end. And a lot of times that shows up in our negotiation styles. So I'm sure that, you know, so like the guy that I was describing who he hates the topic of negotiation. He had the hardest time interviewing me because he just doesn't like the topic. I'm actually going to have him on the show to talk about why he has that reaction. He was very stunned when I reached out to him about that, but I was just so taken by it. But we've encountered, and you and I have both negotiated a lot, and our listeners have negotiated and met these people who are just so value taking, who are so aggressive. And if you don't have that sense of humor and that optimism, then those people who are like, I call them, in our world, we call them champions. They're champions for themselves. They see negotiation as a battle, and they go into it armed and armored, and their whole mission is to wipe the floor with you. They just want to annihilate you. And if we focus on those individuals as what negotiation is, then we miss the point, because the vast majority of us don't negotiate that way. The vast majority of us negotiate with an end in mind, but that we have this openness about what it is that we want and how we're going to get to there. And most people are reasonable in my experience. So
you're right.
Yeah. So tell us, how can our audience find you? How can they follow the progress on the chocolate, and kind of how can they find you?
Yeah, well, currently I'm living in my mother's basement.
All right. It looks that way. She's got a lovely basement. Absolutely lovely.
So the chocolate, we're going to be launching a platform shortly. But in the meantime, you can always go to my website, comedynick.com, if you want a couple of laughs. Yousiflaw.com is the work site. And hopefully I'll be on stage soon enough. I mean, obviously the pandemic has created kind of a challenging situation for comics and entertainers, but I've been doing a lot of shows via Zoom. So if you follow me on Facebook, you'll be able to see a lot of my Zoom podcasts with some other really great, talented comedians. And yeah.
Awesome. So anything else that you want to share about negotiation and your experience with it with our audience, that kind of a tip or something piece of wisdom that you want to leave the audience with?
You know, I always think that when it comes to negotiating, you want to understand where your leverage points are. So, hey, there's something you have in this negotiation that the other side needs. And just identify that. And identify all possible areas of leverage. Because I feel like the person that understands the leverage points and the variety of the leverage points soonest or the most quickly will get to the point where they want to get to for their client or for themselves. So if I start to think about the other side and what their leverage points are or are not, and what mine are, if the other side has underestimated what our leverage points are, when I introduce them in the negotiation, I can already feel the scales tipping in my favor. So so that's how I look at it. And also one last thing to close with. for me in terms of negotiating tactic is you always want to leave a little bit on the table. Because if you go for the jugular, I always tell everybody, yeah, you can go to trial and they may walk away from this. And what's the economic impact of that? You've got them in the negotiation. Just getting them to the table sometimes is a victory in and of itself. When you go to trial, it's really a loss because you have taken on such an enormous risk of losing that it probably doesn't justify whatever you gain by winning. And the other side can always appeal, and the other side can always hem and haw, and the other side, I don't know, could die and then not make good on their promise. So we can't predict the future, but we can predict what's going to happen today in this negotiation. So get to your leverage points. Don't be afraid to leave a little bit on the table because you've got to get to negotiating the next thing. So if you're trying to grab every crumb and you're going to beat down the other side, you've just wasted. It's an exercise in futility because you should always be negotiating, and you're taking time away from future negotiations with that party or with other parties where you can make money, get success, get whatever it is you want. Get in, get what you need, know your leverage points, leave some crumbs on the table, and get moving with your life.
Awesome. Oh, I love that. That is, yes, I echo and fully agree with all of that. Nick, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on this show. I look forward to getting my sample of chocolate. I'm very excited about that. And to the audience, thank you very much for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next episode of In the Venn Zone, where we are changing the nature of negotiation for small businesses. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Venn Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.venn.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Venn Zone.